Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving into something pretty wild today, biological transformation. We've got some incredible source material, and the guy at the center of it, Christian Urasanu, has one heck of a story.
Well, and what's really interesting about Mirasano is he's coming at this from a science background.
Mhm.
He's a Romanian science TV journalist, and he's an author. So he's not just some random person out there making these claims.
Right, and this is where it gets even more interesting. Mirasanu says he actually healed himself from multiple diseases that traditional medicine considers incurable,
Yeah,
using this technique that he calls biological transformation, controlled by the mind, or BTCM for short.
right, BTCM.
And get this, he claims that he can actually teach this ability to others.
Yeah, this is really challenging a lot of our assumptions about healing
Yeah.
and what the mind is actually capable of. So let's unpack it. Let's break it down.
Okay, so to really understand how he got here, let's rewind back to 2001. When he was 37, Murasanu was diagnosed with a whole bunch of pretty serious conditions. Degenerative disc disease, chronic headaches, a weakened immune system, and chronic rhinitis.
Can you imagine getting that news at 37? I mean, these were considered lifelong conditions back then. It's a lot to process.
And it wasn't just a diagnosis, on paper. This actually got progressively worse for him. Even though he had been practicing yoga for years, the pain got so bad that he actually lost height from spinal compression.
Wow.
He even went through a period of 60 days with almost no sleep.
It's hard to even imagine.
Oh.
He describes the pain as feeling like he had been in a car accident. So it's clearly debilitating.
Yeah, so how does someone go from that level of suffering to claiming they're completely healed?
Yeah, this is where things take a very unexpected turn. Morisano points to a very specific day, February 3rd, 2006, as a major turning point. He was in bed, feeling angry, and on the verge of what he describes as an episode of ejaculation. But instead, something totally different happened, what he calls an ejaculation, a complete internal absorption of seminal fluid.
Ejaculation. Okay, that's a new one.
Yeah, and it was no one for him, too. Even he admits that he was skeptical at first.
I bet.
But what's wild is that he claims his pain vanished within days, and he completely stopped all medical treatment. And this experience is the basis for his entire BTCM theory.
So essentially he's saying that he cured himself by somehow consciously controlling his seminal fluid.
That's the core idea. He believes that traditional practices like yoga, while they can be helpful, they only scratch the surface because they don't fully utilize what he calls the body's biological resources.
And what are these biological resources that he's talking about?
He believes that seminal fluid and menstrual fluid in women contain powerful growth factors that, when properly circulated, can trigger regeneration and healing throughout the body.
So it's kind of like how stem cells are believed to have the potential to repair and regenerate tissues?
Exactly. It's a very similar concept. But Mirasano takes it even further, claiming that this process can lead to all sorts of other benefits, like needing less sleep, eating less, and even reversing aging.
Now that's a bold statement. So how does BTCM actually work in practice? What do you actually do?
Well, it's more than just a physical technique. Mirasano outlines 5 key life attitudes as the foundation of BTCM.
Okay, let's hear these life attitudes.
All right, so they are a balanced diet, educating yourself about BTCM, respect for truth, paced breathing, and what he calls life consciousness, which is basically about being mindful of your thoughts and actions and how they affect your well-being.
So there's a mental and even philosophical aspect to it, not just physical exercises.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But there is a physical component as well. He teaches specific muscle exercises that help men and women transfer these fluids into their bloodstream.
And this is where it gets really interesting, right? Because he claims that men can actually learn to delay ejaculation for 10 minutes or more through practice, which indirectly contracts the prostate and helps circulate these growth factors.
Right, and he also stresses that BTCM can be practiced solo or with a partner. But both people need to be on the same page if they're doing it together.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we've got this compelling personal story, we've got a unique theory of healing, and we've got these specific techniques involved. But where does science fit into all of this?
Yeah, that's the big question.
Yeah.
His claims are pretty extraordinary. Is there any scientific backing for this?
Right.
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? While Mirasanu's claims are definitely out there, they haven't been widely accepted by mainstream science yet.
Okay.
There is research on growth factors and their potential for tissue regeneration, but not in the specific way that Mirasanu describes.
So is he totally off base then?
Not necessarily. There are scientists like Bruce Lipton, whose work on epigenetics explores how our thoughts and beliefs can actually affect our biology.
Right, we've talked about Lipton's work before. He's a biologist who studies how things like our environment and experiences can change how our genes express themselves.
Exactly. So while more research is definitely needed to validate Murasanu's specific claims, it's not entirely outside the realm of possibility.
Okay, so we've got Murasanu's journey, his BTCM theory, and the practice itself. But there's one last piece of the puzzle, right? This transmission idea.
Oh yeah, and this is where things get really mind-bending. He believes that when someone is open and enthusiastic of BTCM, their subconscious can pick up what he calls educated programs from his own mind. And he claims he's already successfully trained 5 people this way.
5 people, that's a very small group.
It is. And this claim is probably the hardest to reconcile with our current scientific understanding.
Yeah.
But remember, we're approaching this with an open mind and exploring all the possibilities.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. Murasanu's personal experience, his BTCM theory, the actual practices involved, and even this wild idea of subconscious transmission.
Yeah, we've been trying to look at it all through a scientific lens, right? Acknowledging that while some aspects overlap with existing research, we really need much more rigorous studies to actually evaluate Murasanu's claims.
It's definitely a lot to process. So for our listeners out there, why should they care about any of this? What's the takeaway?
Well, that's a great question. Whether or not you fully buy into BTCM, I think Murasanu's story raises some really big questions about what our bodies are truly capable of and the potential power of the mind. You know, it encourages us to think outside the box and consider possibilities that might seem really far-fetched at first.
Yeah, it makes me think about how throughout history, some of the most revolutionary discoveries were initially met with so much skepticism and resistance. Like imagine telling people a few centuries ago that we'd be able to fly or transplant organs. They would have thought you were crazy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We have to be careful not to dismiss something just because it sounds strange or unfamiliar. But at the same time, we can't just blindly accept everything we hear. That's where critical thinking comes in.
Right. And speaking of critical thinking, we have to acknowledge that there's not a lot of scientific consensus on Murasanu's claims, especially when it comes to this transmission aspect. Are there any red flags or areas of concern that our listeners should be aware of?
Oh, absolutely. First off, the sample size for his claims, particularly regarding the transmission phenomenon, is tiny. We're talking about anecdotes, not rigorous studies with large groups of people. And while anecdotes can be interesting, they don't prove anything definitively.
Yeah, it's like just because your friend's aunt knew someone who cured their cold with garlic doesn't mean garlic is a proven cold remedy.
Exactly. We also have to consider the potential for bias. Murasanu has dedicated his life to BTCM. It's the foundation of his books and workshops and teachings. So while we don't want to automatically dismiss his experiences, it's important to remember that his perspective might be influenced by his passion for this method.
That's a really good point. I know I tend to be more enthusiastic about things I'm really passionate about, and that can sometimes color my perception.
Of course. No, that's where things get really exciting. If we entertain the possibility that consciously controlling these fluids could unlock healing and regeneration, it could completely revolutionize healthcare as we know it.
It would be like discovering a hidden superpower within ourselves.
Yeah, imagine a world where chronic pain, degenerative diseases, even the effects of aging could be mitigated or even reversed through practice and mental focus. It's a pretty mind-blowing prospect.
It would definitely shift the focus from external interventions like surgeries or medications to empowering individuals to take control of their own health and healing.
It would be a complete paradigm shift in healthcare, moving away from a reactive model where we treat problems after they arise to a more proactive and preventative approach.
Yeah. That's a really powerful idea. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. What would need to happen for BTCM to gain wider acceptance and potentially even become integrated into mainstream medicine?
Well, rigorous scientific studies are definitely key. We need well-designed experiments with control groups and measurable outcomes to really investigate the specific claims of BTCM.
And these studies would need to be conducted by independent researchers, not just people who are already invested in promoting BTCM.
Exactly. We also need to dig deeper into the biological mechanisms involved. How are these growth factors being circulated? What specific physiological changes are happening in the body?
And what about potential risks and side effects? I mean, even natural approaches can have unintended consequences.
You're absolutely right. It's a long and winding road from intriguing anecdotes to proven safe and effective treatments.
Okay, so where does all of this leave us? What are some key takeaways for our listeners who might be wondering if they should start incorporating BTCM into their own lives?
Well, as we've discussed, critical thinking is paramount. Don't just blindly accept or reject extraordinary claims. Do your research, explore different perspectives, and form your own informed opinion based on the available evidence.
And remember, science is always evolving. What seems impossible today could become accepted knowledge tomorrow. Remember when people used to think the Earth was flat?
Exactly. So while we don't have all the answers about BTCM yet, I encourage everyone to stay curious, keep an open mind, and maybe even check out Mirasanu's work for themselves.
See what resonates with you, what sparks your curiosity. Maybe this deep dive will inspire you to explore the mysteries of the human body and the power of the mind a little further.
Who knows? Maybe in the future we'll be revisiting this topic with more scientific data to either support or refute Mirasanu's claims. That's the exciting thing about the unknown, isn't it?
There's always more to learn and discover. And on that note, we're going to wrap up part 2 of our exploration of BTCM. Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll be diving into some listener questions and discussing some further implications of these fascinating ideas.